Valerie Bacquet's sad story is one of the worst ever seen in France. Valerie was enduring constant abuse from her husband. He even made her sell herself to make money for him. But when he began to involve their 14-year-old daughter in the same dangerous path, Valerie took matters into her own hands and put a bullet in his head. Daniel Paulette was a violent person from when he was young. His brothers even called their house the house of the devil because they felt like they were living with someone evil. Daniel wasn't just rude and aggressive. He was also mean to his dad right from when he was a kid, and he didn't care at all. His brothers saw him change into a cruel and uncaring person over time. After he was done being violent to his dad, he made his brothers clean up the mess, which always ended up with lots of blood and broken stuff all over the house. And it wasn't just his dad he hurt. His sister went through the same thing when she was only 11 years old. Paulette intimately abused her. The worst of all was that the woman had to keep silent about these abuses all her life because her monster brother had threatened her if she revealed the story. Back in 1992, in the small town of La Colette in eastern France, a man's cruel actions didn't just stay within the walls of his family home. This man's life was about to collide with that of Valerie Bacquet. Valerie's parents had split up, and her mom wasted no time in moving on with a guy named Daniel Paulette. She brought him home to live with them, making him Valerie's stepdad. That decision would completely alter her 12-year-old daughter's life. Daniel, who was 25 years older than Valerie, turned out to be a heartless man who had barged into her life and soon started behaving inappropriately towards her. Daniel abused little Valerie by repeating the traumatic story of her sister. From that moment on, he would never stop. Every day, when the young woman returned from school, her stepfather waited patiently for her to finish her snack and then ordered her to go upstairs. The poor girl understood what that meant, but she also knew that she must obey his darkest and most perverse desires if she didn't want to be punished. The abuse persisted for years until when the family's closest relatives began to suspect that the relationship between the stepfather and stepdaughter had crossed boundaries. Eventually, the abuse was reported to the police, leading to the arrest and sentencing of Daniel Paulette to 4 years in prison. After 2 years of believing she was finally safe from her abuser, Valerie's life took a cruel turn when her stepfather was released from prison due to good behavior and returned home. The abuse resumed, and to Valerie's dismay, no one seemed surprised by Daniel's return to the family as if nothing had happened. At 14 years old, Valerie felt trapped with no escape and no one to turn to for help, not even her mother. She once again became a victim of her stepfather's abuse. Thus, as a result of her repeated abuse, the young woman became pregnant at the age of 17. Faced with this heartbreaking revelation, her mother, who should have protected her daughter, made the cruelest decision that would sink her daughter's life even further. Her mother decided to break the relationship with Daniel Paulette, but not only that, she kicked them both out onto the street. Without a home and no one to protect her from her abuser, the young French woman knew that she did not have many options and she ended up at the complete mercy of the stepfather. Things were about to get darker. In the life of the young pregnant woman, Valerie would cease to be Daniel Paulette's stepdaughter to become his wife. Daniel and Valerie moved in together, and her stepfather forced her to marry him. After giving birth to her first child, she would become pregnant again by her abuser, with whom she had a total of 4 children. Her children were not safe from Daniel's violent episodes. They also suffered a life of threats and abuse from their early years. When they were still children, tired of the violence, they turned to the mayor of the town to report their father, but neither he nor the police listened to them. Everyone in the place knew Daniel. They knew he was an alcoholic, irritable, and violent man, and that it was best not to get involved in his affairs. For years, this man subjected his family of 5 to physical abuse, emotional torment, and various forms of mistreatment. The children were forced to comply with his demands and were not allowed to express their thoughts or opinions. Witnessing their mother's tears and enduring brutal beatings at the hands of Daniel became a daily occurrence. Dylan and Roman, the couple's children, were subjected to senseless violence, leading them to believe that such behavior was normal within families. Just when it seemed like things couldn't deteriorate any further, they did. Upon retiring from his career as a truck driver, Paulette decided that his stepdaughter, partner, and mother of his children should work to provide him with a steady income. This is how he forced Valerie to offer herself as a companion in the back of a van, on the roads of the province. Valerie found herself in a difficult situation, unable to resist the demands of her former stepfather who was now her husband. Adding to her struggles, she lacked the resources to support herself. With 4 mouths to feed, Valerie faced a daunting challenge with no assistance in sight. Neither her mother nor any relatives were able to provide help, and the authorities seemed indifferent to their plight. In this way, Beckett, with no way out, began to make money by providing all kinds of intimate services at rest areas along a highway. Economic income was very low in that poor area of France, with few locals. As punishment, due to the lack of money she earned, Daniel Paulette began to beat her severely. It seemed like the family's life was doomed to suffering, but there was an event that was the last straw for Valerie. It was a moment that made her realize the only way to stop the abuse and mistreatment was to kill Daniel. On March 13, 2016, Valerie got a new threat from her husband because she didn't do what one of his clients wanted her to do. To make things worse, Daniel even asked their younger daughter if she had her first period yet. These two things were the last straw after years of abuse, so Valerie ended her husband's life with a shot to the back of his head. Valerie hid Daniel's body in a remote spot, the village where it all started. But she didn't do it alone. Her 15-year-old daughter, her daughter's boyfriend, and her 2 sons, aged 16 and 17, helped her. After getting rid of the body, Valerie reported Daniel missing to throw off any suspicion. A year and a half went by without anyone finding out what happened. The family tried to keep going, but in October 2017, the police found the body of the man who had been killed. Valerie, the mother, was arrested and admitted she did it. She went to court with her children. Roman, who was 21, said his mom was innocent. He said they suffered for years because their dad was abusive. They had no help to escape. They were trapped in a cycle of violence. Camille, Valerie's daughter, remembered terrible things their dad said. He threatened to hurt their mom and kill them all. Camille also said her dad did inappropriate things to her when she was young. She was scared and didn't want to be abused like her mom. Valerie decided to stop it all to protect her daughter. Finally, the French woman had murdered her stepfather and abuser. She later claimed that her intention had not been to end the man's life, but that the situation had become unbearable and there was no turning back. It was either him or her family. The ordeal of the woman and the children was over, and they only hoped that justice would not be too harsh on them. In 2021, the trial started for the murder of Daniel Paulette. Valerie might get life in prison for being accused of killing him and hiding his body. Her shocking story, which began when she was young and ended when she decided she had enough, surprised the country. It also started a discussion about how the government fails to protect women from abusive men, especially after a new wave of women being killed in France. Because the case became well known and shocked many people, more than 500,000 people signed a petition to Emmanuel Macron, the president of France. They asked him, through the Ministry of Justice, to pardon Valerie Beckett and stop her from being punished. Important feminist figures, like the former Minister of Women's Rights, supported her and asked the president to set her free. After being held in jail for a year before the trial, Valerie was allowed to wait for her punishment at home with an electronic device to track her movements. Finally, the decision was made with everyone in the country watching. Valerie Beckett got 4 years in jail, but only 1 year was without freedom, and she didn't have to serve the last year because of the time she already spent in jail. When Valerie heard the decision, she fainted because she was so surprised. After they heard the decision, her kids ran to her and cried with tears of joy. They had been through a lot and even got in trouble for helping hide the corpse of their father, but in the end, they didn't get punished either. When the trial was over, a bunch of people outside of the courtroom cheered for Valerie and said, "Well done." However, Beckett told the press that her battle was not over yet. The suffering woman did not feel relieved, but rather completely shattered, physically and mentally. All she wanted was to reunite with her 4 children after so much time. Valerie, now cleared of charges and abuse, had one thing clear. Her children would help her overcome it. They had always been her hope and the reason she endured so many years of abuse. Valerie's and her family's case sparked a national change regarding incest punishment in France. Significant legislative changes were made, including prohibiting marriages with minors under 15 years old. Incest, when the victim is under 18 years old, becomes a crime of abuse. The woman put an end to a lifetime of all kinds of abuse from what was first her stepfather and then her husband. Valerie Baquet became an emblematic figure of domestic violence in France. For more stories like this, follow and subscribe to our channel.